who do driver licensing right from learners through to Class 4. We've had the opportunity to meet some of the students here this morning, which is fantastic. The thing that I wanted to just start with is I'm really proud of the providers like On Demand that provide driver licensing support. MSD has had a target of 19,000 places. We've gone well in excess of that at 21,000. And the success rate across the board has been 82%, which is brilliant. I do want to do just a shout out to On Demand though, their pass rate is 99%, which is a phenomenal result. And I think really, you know, why is this important to us? Why is it important to me as the Minister for Social Development and Employment? We know that 70% of jobs require a driver's licence. And so it is really important that we provide assistance and support all the way through for people to get their driver's licence. And we've met a wide range of people here today who are in that process. So whether it's for them driving legally, we do know that if we can avoid a first contact with the justice system by somebody driving legally, that is fantastic. And in parts of rural New Zealand, actually it's really even more important for young people to get a driver's licence and to be able to connect within their community and take up the job opportunities. So for me, this is directly related to achieving our job seeker target, supporting more New Zealanders with their driver licence to help them get a job. So I'm going to pass over to Chris.
Thank you very much, Louise, and thank you to Costa and the team here at On Demand. Today we're announcing the biggest change to the driver licence system since 2011. And as Louise says, we want to make it simpler and easier for people to get their driver's licence. And the changes we're announcing today are a package of changes that will make it easier and cheaper for people, particularly young people, to get their full driver's licence, which, as Louise says, is such a critical enabler of mobility and for jobs. And you would have seen a couple of young chaps downstairs who are, sitting their driver's licence so they can go to school and also so that they can, seek work. And those are real life examples of why these changes that we're announcing are important. There's quite a lot of detail, so I just do want to run you through the major ones. There's a lot of people very interested in this. What we've done is come up with, I think, a package that creates the right mix of ease of access but also protecting road safety, and obviously that is really important. That's the reason we have a driver's licence system, is ultimately to make sure that we have safe drivers on the road. The first key change is we are getting rid of the full licence practical test. So once this system comes into force, drivers will no longer need to sit a second practical test to move from their restricted to their full licence. This will save both time and money. So the status quo is you do your theory test, your learners, then you do one practical test to get your restricted, then you have to go and do a second practical test to get your full licence. Under the changes we're announcing today, that second test will be done away with, and people will spend a certain period of time on their restricted and then will be able to apply for their full licence, but they won't have to sit a test. And there will also be a reduction in the fees, obviously, because we're not requiring people to go out and drive around and do that test in a practical way. We are an outlier in requiring a second practical test, so this brings New Zealand into line with comparable countries overseas. So in terms of the length of time people spend on their restricted, if you're under 25, the requirement will be 12 months. If you're older than 25, it will be 6 months before you can go and do your full. We are requiring a longer time spent on your learner's licence for people under 25s. So the status quo, what we have at the moment, is 6 months on your learners before you can go and sit your restricted. We will be increasing that to 12 months for under 25s, and the reason for that is that 16 to 24-year-olds in New Zealand have more than twice the rate of road deaths than those aged over the age of 25. But there will be options to reduce that time period. So as I say, if you're on your learners, the new default will be 12 months. It's currently 6, it will be 12 months, but there'll be options to reduce that down to 6 months for under 25s, either by recording practice hours, supervised practice hours, or by completing an approved practical driving course. So young people under the age of 25 will be able to go and do a approved practical course. The courses will be approved by the Director of Land Transport, which is an independent regulator inside the Transport Agency, and they will also be setting the rules around how the supervised hours will work as well. This is what happens in other countries. There's a range obviously in other countries, but one very common thing is supervised practical hours. So that could be your parents, or it could be an older person who's had their licence for a decent period of time. You can go out and, in the same way that many young kids still learn to drive these days with your parents, they could be supervised practice hours that will reduce the time period spent on your learners back down to 6 months. The restricted period, as I say, will be 12 months for under 25s and 6 months for over 25. And we're getting rid of the what's currently there, which is the option to do a defensive driving course. So there's a range of things in the status quo, what we have right now. For ease of simplicity, we are getting rid of that ability. It's a default of 12 months for under 25s and 6 months for over 25s. We are also creating a system where if you are on your restricted and you get demerits, so for speeding offences, for example, then it pushes out the length of time you have to stay on your restricted by 6 months. And I think that's fair. It indicates that you have not yet learned how to drive safely by definition if you're getting demerit points. I think people would say that's a fair enough common sense change. A couple of other changes which I think are important. We're requiring fewer eyesight screenings, so you'll have to go and do your eyesight test when you get your learners. Other than that, just when you renew your licence, you won't have to go and do it. At the moment, people have to go and do an eyesight test on their learners, and they do it again for their practical, and then they have to do it again for their full, so we're just getting rid of that. And also expanding the zero alcohol rule. So the new rule will be, and we have to legislate for this, learner and restricted drivers, regardless of age, will be subject to a zero alcohol limit. And that's because even small amounts of alcohol result in increased crash risk, particularly affects inexperienced drivers. So that combination of inexperience and alcohol, it's a fatal mix, and so we think that's a common sense change. Finally, we're also ensuring stronger oversight of training providers. NZTA will gain new powers to monitor and suspend driver training course providers. Taken together, these changes will make it cheaper and easier to get a full driver's licence. So, under the current system, the total cost of getting a Class 1 car licence is $362.50. Under the new system, the total cost will be $282.50, so a saving of $80. And the bulk of that is in the reduction in the full licence fee, which is declining quite considerably as a result of not requiring that second practical test. As I think people will know, we consulted on this last year. There were thousands of submissions, including from major important stakeholders like the AA and others. We analysed those submissions and thought about this quite carefully. This has gone through quite a robust process. This affects many millions of New Zealanders, obviously. We wanted to take the time to get it right, and it's not something that you do every year. So as I say, it's the most significant change to the system since 2011, which was the last time we did that, and of course raised the learner licence age up to 16. I think this strikes the right balance between cost efficiency and safety. The new system will take effect on the 25th of January 2027. That's the go live date, and over the course of between now and next January, there'll be a range of things coming out, including updated tests, materials, the rules around supervised practice hours, approved driving instructions and instructors and things like that. So, happy to take your questions. Thank you very much.
So it's going to be cheaper to get your licence overall. How is the government going to afford that, and how much will it cost?
Well, there's a reduction in the cost as well, obviously. So, as I say, by not requiring that second practical test, all the instructors who have to go out and the assessors and the testers. So there is a reduction in the cost. It's mainly the practical test, but it's also the not requiring the eyesight test. All of those things have a cost to them, which has to be itemised and accounted for. So, overall the reduction is $80 for your full, and we publish the data, publish the numbers which show you, at each stage what the amount will be.
But do you know what the cost to the government might be?
All of these things are run on a cost recovery basis. NZTA runs a series of accounts for all the different licensing and all the different things that are done under licence by NZTA, and NZTA has a range of accounts that run all of that stuff. So the general rule is cost recovery. There's overs and unders over time, and there's a complicated formula and discussions around all of that. But you know, for this announcement from January 2027, that will be the cost. You know, we're always looking for efficiencies, but that's the cost as it is at the moment.
Yeah, we've heard stories about people having to wait months to sit their tests.
Yeah.
What impact do you believe this is going to have on testing centre wait times?
Well, unfortunately, the wait times that were created in the last 2 or 3 years were because the previous government made it free to do a resit. So if you failed a test, and then it was free to go and do a resit, and so it was essentially costless for people to just go and try and fail because they could just go and sit it again for free. So unsurprisingly, people flooded the testing centres knowing that it was essentially cost-free to have to go and do it again, other than their own time, obviously, which is a factor, but in terms of money, it was costless for them anyway, not costless for the government, and that flooded testing centres with demand. So we've made changes to that, and now the system is much better than it was. The effect of these changes, I think, will make it easier generally, because you know we're not requiring that second practical test, and there'll be businesses and the providers will have there'll be different arrangements around that, which will come in due course, and that's partly why it's a year or so to implement.
Yeah, will there be any impact on staff at those testing centres, or driving instructors having essentially less work to do?
Possibly. I mean, let's wait and see. We don't create systems in order to, the centre of the system we create has got to be for the millions of users of the system, and so there'll probably be a range of changes. So for example, there will probably be a market that develops in approved practical driving courses, because one of the ways in which you can reduce down your time on your learners, if you're under 25, from 12 months to 6 months, is to go and do an approved driver course. Now, we haven't set those courses yet, and there will be a range of providers that are active in this space already that may well want to offer those courses. That will happen over the course of the next year or so. So, we'll be creating some work and creating some jobs, and there'll be other, operational employment changes probably as a result as well.
What's the rationale behind not making that mandatory for everyone? You're only making people do those hours to reduce the time down. Why not have that across the board as the AA suggested?
Well, we think we've tried to calibrate the changes we've made to the risk profile of drivers. So the reality is younger drivers are just riskier on the roads, and I think people kind of intuitively understand that. And so the changes we've made are calibrated towards that risk profile, and making sure that essentially what we're doing is we're shifting the assessment and shifting the work that's required to get your licence away from where you know how to drive and it's just about getting the test or getting the assessment done, and shifting it down towards the bit where it makes the biggest difference, which is when you're initially learning how to drive. And so the burden is shifting earlier on in the process rather than later in the process.
But why not make that mandatory? I mean, they're 6 months older potentially, and they don't have as many hours under their belt. Maybe they'll pass the restricted test, but they don't have those hours on the road. So how does the risk profile change from them being 18 or 18 and a half when they get their restricted?
Compared to...
If they don't do those hours on the road,
yeah.
Then they've got to wait an extra 6 months.
Yes.
But they haven't done those hours. So how does that risk profile?
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Well, so status quo at the moment is you can go and get your restricted after 6 months. We're increasing that as a default to 12, which means that by definition, on average, there'll be more driving in that time and more practice, because you've got more experience and you're getting older and learning how to use the road. We think it's sensible to say, well, if you actually go and do a proper professionally run, supervised course that's approved, that we know makes a difference in terms of experience on the road and learning of the road code and all the practical skills of driving, to reduce that down, we think that's fair and reasonable. We also thought it was really important to make sure that you could get your full licence by the time you're 18. Under this new system, assuming you got your driver's licence on day one of your birthday, very, very nice birthday present, you could get your learners at 16, you could get your restricted at 17, and you could get your full licence at 18. And that's because, 18, a lot of kids leaving school or going to uni, going into the workforce, going to a poly or into a trade. Driver's licences are important, and we think that connection between being 18 and adulthood and often entering the workforce or entering further study, the ability to have a driver's licence at that age is really important, particularly in rural areas, I have to say. Really important in our rural areas, regional and provincial New Zealand. So we wanted to keep that connection between 18 and having your full driver's licence, and the system we're announcing today allows that to take place, but it strengthens the safety requirements earlier on in the process.
Are there still the same restrictions on drivers who are on their restricted? For example, if they can only drive alone in between certain hours?
Yes. Yes. No, we're not changing that. Yep.
And how confident are you that these changes aren't going to mean there's an increase in accidents involving new drivers?
Well, we've taken advice on this from the Ministry of Transport and officials on the way through, and we think this is a balanced package, as I say, that strikes the right balance between ease of access and also ensures safety outcomes. Now, it's like everything in life, you could make getting your driver's licence as difficult as possible, as fiendishly hard as you wanted, and you would probably achieve better road safety outcomes. But that would be bad for New Zealand and bad for access to jobs and employment and all the other things that you want to have happen. On the other hand, you could make it really easy and not have a test at all, just let anyone get behind the wheel of a car and say, go for your life. We don't do that either, because people would say that's crazy. You've got to make sure that people are on the road who are safe. So all these things, it's a bit like with speed limits, to be honest. All of these things, by definition, are a balance. And I think we've got a balanced package here that will lead to better access and also road safety outcomes.
If people repeatedly fail the restricted test, how much will that cost? Will the $80 reduction make that much of a difference?
Well, if they repeatedly fail their restricted, you've got to keep sitting it, and they just go through the system like anybody else. And there are people who do that, and my advice to them would be, potentially go and do a course, and you just got to keep trying until you sit your restricted. But if you fail your restricted, by definition, you are not safe to be on the road without supervision.
But for the cost, will it be that much cheaper in comparison to the $80 reduction?
Well, no, because no. We've worked it out on the basis that you pass, at each time. You've got to use a proxy comparator. So, no, by definition, if you keep failing, it will be more expensive than the cost reductions that we're announcing. But, that is what it is. You've got to make sure people pass.
Would you be looking at increasing that restricted test fee at all, and those reset fees?
Well, there'll potentially be increases in the future. I'm not going to get ahead of that process. At a regular period, the government goes through fees reviews.
Not in the next term.
No, well, certainly not on January 2020.
Yeah.
Certainly not on January 2027.
Yeah, will people be able to sit that full test right up until January 27? Say, example, I've been on my restricted licence for 12 months now.
Yes.
Should I wait until then, or should I?
Yeah, so there is going to be an interesting little transition period. So we took some advice around, do you phase it in? Do you, create a category of people who have got different rules? It got very complicated very quickly because people are at different stages. And in the end, we decided the cleanest thing was just go live on 25 January 2027, and the new rules just apply to everybody from that date. So for someone like you, who, what I'm hearing is you've been on your restricted for 12 months. I'm assuming you've got a clean driving record, or maybe you don't want to admit to that on camera. But if you've got no demerits, you will be able to essentially apply for your full from the 25th of January next year, and you'll be able to get your full. So you won't have to go and do your practical test.
Maybe a bottleneck.
Yeah.
Possibly, and we'll take some advice around that. We're going to monitor the implementation over the next year or so quite carefully. We can track not individually, but we know the numbers coming through the system, and we've got pretty good data around the testing centres and how many people are at all those different stages. We're monitoring that pretty carefully. And yeah, so there's going to end up being a transition. It'll be a little bit messy, to be honest. That's just, you move from one system to a new system, that's what's inevitably going to happen. But it's going to be a lot simpler than, segmenting out particular groups of people, everyone trying to work out who they're at. You create unfairness, sort of almost by definition on the way through that. So we've decided not to do that. We thought about that quite carefully.
And it's still better than doing a second test.
Right, so would you recommend I wait?
Well, I don't want to...
We're not going to provide
advice. We're not going to provide advice on individuals. You might have a job that requires a full licence, I don't know.
It's up to that individual.
It'll be up for the individuals. It'll be up for the individuals.
Locally as well, I mean, we've been hearing people say that the test seems to have gotten harder. I mean, there's no data behind it necessarily to back that up, but is that something that you've heard in terms of advice?
You get anecdotal feedback from young people. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff goes around the place around the easiest place to pass your full, and there's some parts of the country a bit easier than others. I don't know who knows how true that is. Go to so-and-so testing centre because the course they do's easier than the one somewhere else where you've got to go up and down a roundabout and all these sorts of things. So, look, the New Zealand's different, the geography's different, and you're going to get variation. The test hasn't got harder, but obviously interpretation is a matter of degree to some extent. So you do hear all these stories. What I will say is, particularly for teenagers and young people that I talk to in the hut, and I'm sure it's the same for Louise's electorate, very big electorate, it is really anxiety-inducing sitting that full test. I mean, for a lot of young people, they're actually pretty good drivers after they've had a decent amount of time when they're restricted. They know how to drive, and they're pretty good drivers, often frankly better than some adults who've had their licence for 30 years. And just a couple of minor mistakes, often quite minor, means that they fail, and then they've got to go back and sit it again. And it's costly for starters, particularly when you're a teenager with that sort of money, and the time off school and work and study and all the rest. So I know a lot of young people really worry about sitting their full. Now that's not the main reason we've done it, but I think there'll be a lot of young people out there today saying, good stuff, this is great, get on with it.
Yeah, and sorry, you mentioned that you're going to give NZTA powers to suspend certain providers. Is there any concerns that you've seen coming up that's led to that decision?
Well, obviously you've seen in the last few months or so some of the concerns around the fraud that has taken place in some areas that I don't want to speak about today because it's subject to an investigation, obviously, but you'll have seen that. And I just think, given we were making these changes anyway, it's a chance to kind of update our supervision of these of the courses. There's no particular concerns beyond some of the stuff that's been in the media and is subject to investigation. So just a chance to, it's a bit like the eyesight tests and the zero alcohol rules. If you're going to do it as part of a package, do it basically all at the same time.
I'm interested in us getting your parents or older brother or sister to, cock up your hours. Do these people have to register and what? Because you could get Tom from down the road to do it, that could be a little side hustle for Tom. So how are you ensuring that, you've got boundaries in place?
The Director of Land Transport will be publishing rules and guidance around how that works over the course of the next year or so. So that'll be an independent decision of him. The safety regulation is largely done independently of the government administers by the Director of Land Transport. It's an independent officer inside NZTA. So they'll be setting rules, but what I can say is there'll be really clear requirements and rules around what that supervision means. It may be a statutory declaration that people have to sign, just a legal document. There's apps you can use that track, how many hours you're doing and things like that, and where you're going. That technology exists now. So, look, I'm not going to get ahead of that, but that just gives you a bit of an indicator as to how things might look.
Cool. To wrap this up, folks, can we just do one more question? Thank you.
Just going back to my first question. So, just for clarity, will there be a funding shortfall that the NZTA has to deal with now because there's not the second practical test?
Not right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you mind if I just ask a question on another topic?
Sure.
The Federated Farmers have released a statement saying that they've uncovered in the new RMA documents a Govt water tax.
Yeah.
Are you able to address that?
I think that's a stretch and an overstatement. This is complicated, but the new RMA provides the ability for the government to turn on, in the future, if the government decided to do that, market-based mechanisms for allocation of natural resources. Now, there's basically no policy work has been done on that, and we are way away from getting anywhere near anything like that. But it was one of the recommendations of the expert panel was to allow that to be part of the new system in the future if the government wished to do it, and so that's what the bills contain. So I think huge respect for Fed farmers, obviously, but I think it's a bit of an overstretch from what they're saying. And I think that they're making a submission. In fact, I'm sure they're making a submission to the Select Committee, and we'll be thrashing out those sort of issues at the Select Committee. As I said right from day one, from introducing the bills that come out of the Select Committee will be different to what goes into the Select Committee, which is precisely why we're having a really thorough